Hello and welcome back to another tutorial. A couple of episodes ago we created this recipe type and we also created a dependency for JEI. So today we're going to create a JEI plugin to show this recipe. So under common, let's create a new package called .jei and let's create a new class called tutorial JEI plugin. This is going to implement imod plugin from mes.jei.api and add an annotation at JEI plugin. Now let's hover over this and add unimplemented methods, which is going to ask for the plugin ID. So let's create a private static final resource location called plugin ID. We're going to set this equal to a new resource location of tutorialmod.modid and JEI plugin. And now in here we can just return plugin ID. Then let's override two things: register recipes and register categories. And then down here let's create another method where we get all the recipes from the recipe manager. So let's create a private static collection of any value, and this is going to be get recipes, and we're going to need a recipe manager called manager and an recipe type called type, and we're going to return the manager.getRecipes.parallelStream.filter, and then we need a predicate where we're going to get the recipe and we're going to change it to recipe.getType is equal to type, and we're going to do .collect collectors.toList. Then in register recipes, let's just get the recipe manager, so we can do recipe manager is equal to minecraft.getInstance.world.getRecipeManager, and then let's add a suppress warnings resource, and then we can do registration.addRecipes. Then we need a collection for the recipes, so we can just do get recipes of the manager and recipe init dot example recipe, and then we need the ID of the category, which we haven't made yet, so let's just leave this empty. Then let's fill out register categories, where we're going to get the GUI helper. I'm going to call this helper, and we're going to set it equal to registry.getJEIhelpers.getGUI helper. Then we're going to do registration.addRecipeCategories, and then let's pass in a recipe category which we haven't made yet. So let's create an example recipe category, and this is going to implement an recipe category of example recipe. Let's press Ctrl+Shift+O to import example recipe and add the unimplemented methods. So then let's create a public static final resource location called ID, and I'm going to set it equal to a new resource location of tutorialmod.modid and .example recipe category, and then in here we can just return ID. Then back in here we can do example recipe category .id, and over here we can create a new example recipe category and we can pass in the helper. So then over here let's create a new example recipe category with an GUI helper, and that should fix the error that's in here, and that means we're done with this class. So now let's fill in our category. In getRecipe class we're going to return example recipe.class. In getTitle we're going to return a new translation text component, and then we need the string translation key, so let's do category dot, and then let's pass in our mod ID, so let's do plus tutorial mod.modid, and then let's add an example recipe, and then we just need to do .get string, like so. So now in our lang we can do category.tutorial mod.example recipe, and we can change this to example recipe category. We can leave these two for now, and then we need to set ingredients and set recipe, and then we can do ingredients .set input ingredients, and then we can just pass in recipe.get ingredients, and in our recipe we can override get ingredients. Then we can create a non-null list of ingredients called I'm going to set it equal to null list dot create. And then we're going to do I dot add, and then we need a new ingredient, which is going to be our input, and then we can return I. Then back in our category, we need to set the recipe output. So we're going to do ingredients dot set output, and then we're going to do vanilla type dot item. We're going to set it equal to recipe dot get recipe output. Then let's create some drawables. So let's create a private final I drawable, and this is going to be the background, and a private final I drawable icon. First of all, let's set this dot back to helper dot create drawable, and this is going to take a constants dot recipe JEI vanilla, and we want to make sure to import the JEI ones. Then we can pass in 0, 114, 82, and 54. And we're going to set this dot icon equal to helper dot create drawable ingredient of a new item stack, and then we can pass in the icon for our recipe. I'm just going to set it to item init dot example item dot get, but you can set this to whatever you want. Then for the get background, we can return back, and for the get icon, we can return icon. Then in our set recipe, we can get the IGUI item stack group. Let's just call this item stack group, and we're going to set this equal to recipe layout dot get item stacks, and we can do item stacks group dot init. Then we can pass in 0, then boolean input, and yes, this is an input, then the x position and the y position. So we can just leave this as 0 and 0. Then let's do the same thing, but this time with an output, so false, and let's set this to 60, 18, and then item stack group dot set ingredients. However, this is actually going to draw a vanilla recipe, so instead let's create a blank drawable of 180 and 100 in dimensions, like so. Also, we need to render the block, so in our recipe we can, in here, do I.add, and then we can do ingredient.from stacks, and let's create a new item stack of this dot block. Then in our example category, all we need to do is set another input. So let's create another one of these. So let's set this to 1, this to 2. This is also going to be an input, and we're going to set this to 36. And now if we open the game and search for diamonds, we can see that we have our recipe here. If you want to draw a background to this, instead of creating a blank drawable, we can create a normal drawable as before, and you can pass in a resource location for your texture, which is a new resource location of mod ID, and then textures/GUI/whatever your texture is, and then you can place it in here. You can also draw arrows in the draw function, where you can render iDrawable. You can look in the JEI's furnace class to see how you can draw these arrows. That's going to do it for this episode. In the next episode, we'll probably move on to something new, but thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.